Hello everyone, my name is Kitetsu and welcome back to my channel. So this video is all about the top 10 changes that I want to happen to Age of Sigmar, including things that I want to happen with the storyline, the rules, the models, just you name it, changes across the board basically. So Age of Sigmar is great, but there is always room for improvement. As someone who really loves the hobby, I actually found this list quite easy to write. I was sitting there reading the General's Handbook the other day and I just thought, hey, I wish this was different. And it wasn't the first time I remember feeling that way before, so it got me thinking, if I was put in a position of some importance at GW and I had the influence to look at the hobby and reflect on things that were going maybe really well and maybe not so well, what would be the first 10 changes that I would personally implement, no matter what aspect of the hobby I was focusing on? So I pretty much sat down and started writing a list, and that list forms the basis of this video really. Now, obviously it wouldn't be me if I didn't put some sort of disclaimer in here, so the first thing I want to say is that a lot of the things in this list are going to be personal changes that I would like to see happen to AOS, but there could be things on this list that you completely disagree with, and that's totally cool. You know, let's look at differences of opinion as a great opportunity for us to discuss things. I like to be broad-minded, and it's perfectly feasible that you guys could look at things in a totally different way, but from a perspective I haven't seen. So, you know, share those perspectives with me, and you never know, you might completely change my opinion. You know, weirdly enough, I'm one of those people who actually likes changing my opinion. I have a background in science, and in science, basically nothing is ever beyond being disproved. And I like to think that when I change my opinion on something, it's because I've become more informed. So just bear that in mind, share your opinions down below, and yeah, we'll see what comes of that. So anyway, with that little disclaimer out of the way, let's get straight into my list, which is not really written in any particular order. At number 1, we have bring out more start collecting boxes and more great value sets please, Games Workshop. I've talked about these time and time again, and I doubt I will stop anytime soon. These kits have changed the hobby for the better. They are the difference between people getting into the hobby and loving it, or not getting into it at all. It is literally that critical how important these sets are. They entice people into the hobby, and the stuff that is included in them at the moment is incredible. Adding to their appeal is the fact that they aren't boring box sets by any means too. You know, back in the past, Games Workshop had a tendency to release kits like these, which basically they were just filled with bog standard options in them. And I don't know if it's just my preference for like the fantasy setting or the enormous diversity that you get in Age of Sigmar, but look at some of the great options you get in some of these sets. The Fire Slayers get a Magma Droth, the Seraphon get a Carnosaur, the Beastclaw Raiders get a Stonehorn or a Thunder Tusk, Flesh Eater Courts get a Terrorgeist or a Zombie Dragon, the Sylvaneth can build one of the 3 Tree Lord options, including an Ancient or a Spirit of Durthu. The Skeleton Horde contains one of 3 awesome heroes, including one of my personal favourites, Neferata, the Mortarch of Blood. So everything in these sets is like really insanely awesome. There's something exciting to get with your faction of choice. Whether you want to play the game or just build them and paint them, you basically get this really awesome centerpiece. So I'm a big fan of that. The starter set was also incredible value, so why are these things on my list? Basically because I just want more of this stuff. Some factions out there don't even have a start collecting set at the moment, you know, noticeably Caradron Overlords, who are one of the coolest factions in the game and one of my favourite. Without a start collecting set, armies are often just too expensive to collect for a lot of people, so it's critical that more of these value sets come out. Also, now that the Spire of Dawn set has gone off sale, we could also do with more sets kind of like that, which continue to show off Games Workshop's great approach to incredible value. While the Blight War set is also fantastic value, I personally think they can do better. Okay, so number 2, I love the rule in 40k that you can't shoot a character unless it is the closest unit to the firing model. Now, some of you may disagree with that completely, but I love it. This rule is really cool because characters cost so many points in the game, and having them sniped off the board at the very start before they have done literally anything can be a bit annoying and frustrating. I get that even then, tactically you are tying up your opponent's shooting phase for a turn or maybe more, but to me personally that just isn't the role I want my heroes to play. I don't want them to be some sort of shooting sponge. I want them at the forefront of combat, living up to their awesome backstories. So personally, I would love it if they translated this rule across to Age of Sigmar. I know some of you wouldn't agree, and some of you enjoy the tactics of hero sniping, but I kind of like this idea of protecting your heroes behind battle line units. This brings me neatly on to change number 3. I really want Games Workshop to sort out battle line units in the game, and some of you might be thinking, well, there's no issue with them, but I would disagree. If you go and watch my analysis on the Skaven clans, you will see that there are way too many restrictions in place over which units are battle line or not. I think every allegiance, without fail, should have its own battle line option, not just like a battle line if option. And you know, if you flick through the General's Handbook, you find that there are far too many units that aren't battle line that really should be. I feel that armies should be basically made less restrictive in this sense. I would love to see Grundstock Thunderers be made battle line, for example, so that I'm not forced to take 30 Arcanauts in a 2000 point Caradron Overlords list. The same applies to Skaven and their clan rats. If you want to basically mix the clans with the Skaven, you have to take 60 clan rats. Otherwise you have to start taking battle line options that are not Skaven at all, which is really disappointing. Okay, so number 4. This one is a quick and easy one. Every faction should have allegiance abilities. I think Games Workshop are working on this, and they have done a great job with it in the General's Handbook 2017, but I would like to see an allegiance ability for every faction in the game. I'm not sure why they bothered making some of the changes they did to some of the Skaven clans, for example, if they aren't planning on giving them a dedicated allegiance ability. Verminous, for example, gain an extra battle line option for being Verminous Allegiance, but what's the point when you kind of can't give them any unique and cool abilities and items? And speaking of Verminous, this brings us pretty nicely onto change number 5, which is basically that some armies and allegiances really need more models and units to basically bulk them out a bit. If you look at Verminous, they have a measly 4 options to include in your army. They've got a choice of 2 leaders and basically 2 battle line options. How bland is that? If Games Workshop wants to call these factions separate armies, then they need to give them the diversity of models to support that. They are by no means the only army to suffer from this issue. I think that many armies could do with extra units being released to increase the options, and let's face it, no one really wants an entire 2000 plus point army made up of literally like 2 battle line options. Number 6. The Realmgate Wars. It is a fantastic story. It's rich, it's detailed, and it's epic. But what it also means is that Games Workshop has neglected other parts of the storyline, and now that the Realmgate Wars are winding down a bit, this is Games Workshop's chance to start to expand the world of Age of Sigmar and bring back a little bit more of the fantasy flair that we all know and love. So far, Age of Sigmar has told a very tightly focused story where the inhabitants of the realms have all been essentially just primitive tribal people, but now that Sigmar has gained ground in retaking the realms, you're starting to see all of these big, like, settlements and fortifications appearing. We're kind of approaching this nice balance in the storyline where we have regions that are actually relatively stable and quote-unquote safe under the protection of Order armies and fortresses and all of that stuff. So you've got this peripheral threat that chaos can strike at any moment, but that's kind of the way it was back in Fantasy, which is quite a nice balance, I think, to be back at. Something I've missed from Warhammer Fantasy is this whole concept of some of the Empire settlements where people just used to go about their daily lives, getting drunk in taverns, while Skaven assassins are sneaking across rooftops and streets and basically just getting up to no good. I would love it if this sort of feeling is returned to Age of Sigmar, where we just have a little bit more of a personal tale of ordinary people living their lives in these worlds. I love the concept of the battles, obviously, who doesn't? But I also want the world to feel real and inhabited. And now that Blight War is launched, I'm looking forward to seeing where Games Workshop takes the storyline. Linking in with the last couple of points is number 7. I want increased characters. One of the other amazing things about Fantasy was just the sheer number of amazing characters right across the board. They were rich, they were well thought out, they had their own great rules, they had their own great models, and we really need more of these in Sigmar. I think there are just too few characters in the game, and I think it actually hurts the world because of it. I really love characters, I love their storylines, and in my opinion, just the more the better, really. I know Games Workshop have released Neve and Horticulus recently, and they have finally given Cull and Vandus their own war scrolls, so let's hope they continue this trend and start populating the realms with the heroes that we can all get behind. It would be really good if Games Workshop could release some full-length novels on these characters too, instead of just snippets here and there and the odd short story. Neferata, for example, had her own novel in Fantasy, and look at the character development that was present in the End Times books, like it was amazing. So far, characters like Dryker have only really had a short story, and I'm certain a character as interesting as her could be developed much further. As for Brock Grungson from the Caradron Overlords, just to pick up an example, aside from like a small section in the battle tome on him, what do we actually really know? On to number 8. Personally, I am not a fan of the summoning rules in Age of Sigmar. It's not even the rule itself as such, it's more the frequency that summoning abilities appear on certain characters' war scrolls. Like, that's how I'm going to phrase this point. Sometimes you face a real dilemma when you are building up your army list and you need to pick your general, and you are trying to work out whether you should include a character or not due to the abilities that are on their war scroll. Basically, in order to summon a unit, you have to pay for the points cost of that unit in your list, and then usually you will attempt to summon, roll a dice, and if you succeed, you set up that unit in accordance with the rules. Now, that in itself is potentially great because you can tactically place units on the board as and when you want them, and of course you need to pay the cost for them, otherwise you could potentially spam summoning and you could end up with, I don't know, 8,000 points on the board in a 2,000 point list or something crazy like that. But that's probably an over exaggeration, but still. But if you look at a unit like, say, Alariel, she has a Soul Amphorae ability, I hope I'm saying that correctly, which means you have to roll a dice to work out what unit you can summon, which basically makes the process completely random and therefore unreliable. Additionally, the Dryads and Tree Revenants let you summon either 2d6 or 1d6 respectively models in that unit, which basically means you could pay 200 points for a unit which you've kept in reserve or off the table, and then you roll a double 1 and summon 2 of them, which I'm just not really a fan of this, to be honest, at all. Compare it to the Stormcast's Allegiance ability, where they can just teleport straight onto the field by lightning, and it's more reliable and consistent. Not only that, but being an allegiance ability, it doesn't waste potential on your war scrolls, which could just be put towards having a better ability. As a side note, why can't all characters have a command ability? That would probably be an extra thing I'd change. Characters cost a huge amount of points, and therefore they're very likely to be used as the army's general. Yet if you look at most war scrolls for characters, so many of them just don't have a command ability. It's quite often, in my opinion, that a list is just going to be more competitive taking a generic leader with the ability to take a command trait, artifacts and weapons or whatever, and additionally they can have their own inherent command ability. On to change number 9, rule clarity. So this really boils down to two main things. Firstly, I think that rules in Age of Sigmar could just be worded so much clearer, especially when it comes down to like working out what weapon options you can give a unit. How many beginners miss that first paragraph on the war scroll and have no idea that you can't always mix and match weapon options in a unit? Similarly, how many times has the community had to establish an agreed interpretation of certain rules and abilities? I think Games Workshop really needs to frequently just be so much clearer with their wording, so as to avoid them being so open to interpretation. Quite often I think the wording on war scrolls can actually be quite sloppy, and I don't think it would actually take too much tweaking to make the meaning just crystal clear. Sometimes the community has gone over the wording of a rule with a fine-tooth comb and has come to a different understanding than I think was originally intended, but you have to agree with their interpretations, because generally speaking, if you look at the wording closely, the community are often like exactly correct. A good example is Dryker's Swarm ability. Due to the poor wording previously, it was generally agreed by pretty much every player that the ability would actually harm Dryker herself. And again, that just boils down to the wording. If you took it literally and read it word for word, that's more or less exactly what it said. Yet from a logical lore perspective, it didn't make sense. Because, I mean, these things are living within her body anyway, so why would they hurt her anymore when she releases them when they're in all the hives that make up her body? Fortunately, that specific example was clarified in an FAQ recently, that it only affects enemy units, but I just think it took way too long for that clarification to be answered. And if the rules were actually like clearer in the first place, or the wording of those rules, you know, it wouldn't be an issue in the first place. So the second part of that same point is to do with the core rules. Now, because they are so condensed, I actually think it gives you more of the impression that they are simple, but what really happens is that increasing the simplicity of the core rules results in an increase in complexity of the war scrolls. While I think Games Workshop should stick to the way they're currently doing it, I think that the core rules section could do with just having a little bit more explanation and padding to clarify things, especially for beginners. Keep the rules as simple as they are, in terms of the core rules at least, but just flesh them out a bit with less ambiguous wording from time to time. Explain things a bit more, add a bit more padding in there, maybe a few more diagrams, and I think the community would probably appreciate that. Final point then, number 10, updates to war scrolls. So I'm probably going to be a bit sneaky and add a couple of extra changes I'd like after this one, because the other gripes I have are small but worth mentioning. But as for number 10, I would like to know what Games Workshop is planning on doing with regards to basically war scroll updates. I mean, we've seen war scrolls change from time to time as rules are clarified or improved. For example, the Sylvaneth Wildwoods have been changed quite a few times. But as of right now, I don't quite understand their system for when or if war scrolls are going to get a total overhaul. I mean, is that going to be in future battle tomes? Are there going to be different editions of Age of Sigmar? I assume that's the case, but at the moment we simply are just completely in the dark about that. You can guarantee that in 40k, when a new codex comes out, there's a whole new set of rules for each unit, and I find it quite exciting to go and see what all the changes to the rules are going to be. Sometimes it's very disappointing, other times it's quite exciting, but I think there are more than a few War Scrolls in Age of Sigmar that could do with being updated. You might see two characters from two different factions. They might cost the same amount of points, they might have almost identical stat lines, but then you look at their abilities, which may be similar, but where one of them is just far better than the other one. You know, it might be that one of them has an ability that just simply has further range or works on a better dice roll or something like that, but otherwise it's exactly the same. So for the same amount of points, why is one so much better? Additionally, there are certain characters which I think could do with being improved, but obviously I get that with the General's Handbook update they did kind of address some of the balancing issues, but at the same time some characters I think could just be a little bit more inspiring. I think it's just a little bit confusing as well, going back to the whole editions thing, thinking that they're bringing out a new General's Handbook, I assume, every year, and it almost feels like that is a new edition in a way, because all of the points values change, but at the same time you don't get the overhaul of all of the different rules. So I just kind of want to know where that is going, really. So basically that is my main list of the 10 changes that I would want to come, but I do have a couple of honourable mentions. So firstly, pricing. I've already made a video on that, and it's also mentioned in the first point of this video, so I don't want to waste a second one of my 10 slots on pricing, but I would like to see more consistency in the prices of certain models and boxes. Another minor gripe I have is that certain models can be very fragile. Now, there needs to be a balance between all of the impressive detail on the models, but also just making them durable enough to survive transport and gaming. There have actually been, believe it or not, a few models that I have avoided purchasing because I just look at them and think, I'm going to break that. I don't want to have to be so concerned as to how these things are going to stand up that I don't even buy them, so that's not great. I think I've mentioned this one before at some point or another in a video as well, but Chaos Archers. Order have got so many different archers and ranged options, but why do Chaos have so few? I mean, come on GW, give us some archers, please, for Chaos, or at least more. I know there's like a couple of options, but I want to see more. I want to see a unit of just normal guys with bows. Is that too much to ask for? I don't think so, so please just do that. Lastly, I think the whole issue of what you get in the box in terms of weapon options should be a lot closer to what's written on the War Scroll. I know some of you guys really like converting weapons, but it would also be nice if just all of those options were either included in the box or the War Scroll just reflected what you did get in the box. So I know a lot of people weren't a fan of this, but I actually liked the fact that Games Workshop updated the Grunstock Thunderer's War Scroll in the new General's Handbook 2017 to just reflect what is in the box. Personally, if I do a conversion, I will probably buy the genuine weapon off of eBay and then I will glue them on to my models. Improvising bits, I'm not a huge fan of doing that personally, and I know some of you guys are, and that's totally cool, but if you look at, say, my unit of Retributors, I had to buy some Star Soul Maces on eBay, and it can get so expensive trying to do it that way. And you know, because let's face it, if you buy a box of Retributors, there's going to be very few people who don't opt to stick the Star Soul Maces on, which means there's going to be very few people who have them going spare to put them on eBay or Bits websites or wherever these things end up, and therefore the supply is lower than the demand and these things get very expensive. So it's frustrating. So either just give us more weapon options to satisfy the war scrolls in the boxes, or just change the war scrolls, please. That's just a personal gripe, but to be honest, I think that is more or less it from me in this video, really. You know, I'm sure there are other things that could do with changing, and I would like to know down below what changes you would like to see. I guess I'd also like to hear your opinion on the whole strength versus toughness system that 40k has versus the simplified wounding system we get in Sigmar. Personally, I like the way Sigmar does it, but I seem to be in a bit of a minority for that opinion, because lots of people say, oh, it doesn't make sense that, you know, a little goblin is wounding a dragon as easily as an ogre does. But yeah, I could go into my whole arguments, but that's for another video, I assume. But tell me your opinions of that down below as well. Anyway, as always, thank you so much for your support. My channel is doing unbelievable. I can't honestly thank you guys enough. You're being the best audience I could ever imagine, and I will see you guys really soon. So thank you and goodbye.